Welcome to another edition of Hometown Histories. I'm Dallas Grove, and with me is Paul Edelson, president of the Ocean Township Museum, and a lifelong friend of our guest today, Henry Vaccaro, Sr., whose history with the redevelopment of Asbury Park, especially the beachfront, is legendary and ongoing. Henry has a compelling personal story as well. Paul?
Yes, Henry, why don't you just start off with, tell us about how you grew up and, basically through high school and your family.
All right, I grew up, I was born in Asbury Park in 1940. My dad was a doctor, and we initially lived on top of his office, which was at 509 4th Avenue. And in 1946, we moved to Interlaken, and coincidentally, Paul Edelson was our neighbor. He lived across the street, and we kind of grew up together. So moved to Interlaken, and I attended Holy Spirit Grammar School. But 7th and 8th grade, I went to Bordentown Military Institute. The best thing that ever happened in my life. When I look back on it, I mean, how you get regimented into things, and it brought the best out of me, okay? And what I remember most about, not most, but one of the things at Bordentown, when we went into the lecture hall, over the door, it said, good, better, best. Never, never rest until your good is your better and your better is your best. I'll always remember that.
Good slogan, yeah.
Okay. So now, I then went to Asbury High School, and quite frankly, I coasted through the 3 years, all the way up to my senior, never took a book home, nothing, because I learned so much at BMI. I mean, in junior school, we had 3 languages to prepare you for high school. You had German, Spanish, and French. So that when you went to high school, you knew which language you wanted to take. I mean, they instilled discipline into you. So anyway, I went to Asbury High School, and by the time my senior year, I started to really kind of fit in. I played football, played with Frank Budd, who later was the world's fastest human in high school. And what I remember about that was my dad was so proud of me that he would take off from his office, he would take off away from his office and run over and watch part of the high school football game. He'd even get on the field and yell at the referee. But that's my dad. And my dad was a maverick. He had, people don't believe this, he had office hours 7 days a week.
Paul was telling me that he
Yeah.
was, helped everyone.
And from Monday through Saturday, morning hours, afternoon hours, and evening hours. Then at night he made house calls. Later on, I forgot, he had Sunday afternoon hours. Nothing in the morning and nothing but in the afternoon. And my mom was his nurse. And he'd come home, and sometimes he would never come home at night. If the patient was really sick, he'd spend the night at their bedside, because back then, my dad took care of all the poor black patients that were not wanted in the hospitals because they couldn't afford to pay. My dad was thrown out of the medical society for a couple of reasons, because he was sending so many patients to the hospital. But when the Salk polio vaccine came out, it initially came out in a sugar cube.
I took
No,
it
it
that
initially
way.
came out, I think, in an injection, then it became in like a little sugar cube that you took. Well, the medical society was charging, the doctors were charging for the shot. And my father said, the government gave us a medicine for nothing. The least we can do as physicians is to administer for nothing. And he went out and gave over 3,000 or 4,000 shots to Howell Township High School, Wall Township High School, and he wouldn't take any money from them. They sent him a goodwill donation, he just gave it to charity. That was my dad. In 1959, my father was knighted by Pope John the 23rd. They had all of his patients got together and gave him a testimonial dinner at the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. The committee was comprised of 25 of his black patients and 1 white patient.
Is that right?
They all got together for him, because if you were sick and you couldn't afford the medicine, he would call up Warner's drugstore. You could charge it to my father. If he went to your home in the winter time and it was cold and you couldn't afford the fuel, he'd call up People's Ice and Coal. So that Dr. Vaccaro sent some kerosene over to so-and-so's house and put it on my bill. That was my dad. And people don't believe this, he would see 70 to 80 patients a day. A day. Getting back to the dinner now. He's being knighted by Pope John the 23rd. They sent a courier from Rome to knight my father into the Order of St. George in Corinthia for humanitarian deeds. Well, the dinner was 7 o'clock Sunday night. Well, that meant he could have office hours Sunday afternoon. He then went home, changed, put on a tuxedo, attended the dinner. After the dinner, 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock, he made house calls on the west side of Asbury Park. And the last patient he saw was a black man on Borden Avenue who made a comment, because my uncle happened to be with my dad that night, and he said, "Here comes Jesus Christ," and he's dressed in a tuxedo. Well, the next night my father died of a massive heart attack, 51 years old. I had gone back to Villanova University, and when I got word of it, I came home and I just quit college. And I started a construction company, because I like to fool around with my hands.
You started a construction, I know you were fooling around with your hands and did that type of thing, right? But how did you have the nerve to start a construction company? What did you do first?
Okay, but my grandfather, Henry Vaccaro, was a landscape gardener, but he was more than that, because back in the day, they were real gardeners, not like today, they just cut your grass. I mean, he would do everything. Build retaining walls, build tennis courts, take trees down, build streams, whatever it was. And I would kind of pal around with him. Now you got a picture of this, I'm about 6 or 7 years old, and this is right after the war. Well, during the war you could not buy a pickup truck because everything was allocated to the Army. So my grandfather, I'll never forget this, he had a 1939 Chevy coupe, just a little old two-door coupe. So he took the trunk out and put in a pickup body in there, and he called it a Trucagio. And he would go around, and one of his customers was a man named Willie Moretti. Willie Moretti had this giant estate in Deal that took up about 2 whole city blocks. It had a stream running through it, which my grandfather put in. My grandfather built the tennis courts and all that, and I kind of, okay. But in real life, Willie Moretti was a racketeer. He was the man that got Frank Sinatra out of the band leader's contract. He put a gun to his head and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse, which is portrayed in The Godfather. Well, Willie Moretti lived in Deal. And as a kid, I would go over there and cut his grass with about 6 other guys, because it took a whole day to cut the whole block. I mean, back then, you had a hand mower. You cut it with a Continental steel hand mower and go around the block. Anyway, I remember he pats me on the head and brings me cookies and milk. 2 years later, I read in the paper he gets murdered in Bayonne, New Jersey. But that was Willie Moretti. So
I remember that my wife, who lived in Deal, she used to say we go to Moretti's house on Halloween, and they gave everybody silver dollars.
So I kind of got the feel for hard work from my grandfather, from my father, but working with my hands with my grandfather. So fast forward, in my senior year in high school, my dad at the time he wasn't just a doctor, he was a brilliant businessman. When he died, he was the largest property owner in Asbury Park. We owned the Santander Apartments, the Miramar Apartments, the Lake Drive Court Apartments, parking lots along in the beachfront, maybe 15 other properties in town. He was brilliant.
Go back to what year was that?
1959.
59,
So in 58, my senior year in high school, my dad, we owned a big lot that sat behind the Empress Motel, which had just been constructed. And he wanted to build a motel there. We also owned a surf garage, which later became the Sunshine Inn and Hullabaloo and all that. So that corner, my dad was going to build a motel. And our neighbor down the street was a man named Harry Strano, who was friends with my father, and Harry Strano was a builder. So Harry is going to teach me the building business.
this is where it goes.
And then that summer, somehow I found an old backhoe. So I bought this for like $400. It was all broken down. I towed it to Interlaken, put it in a garage, and I started to rebuild it. And my father was kind of proud of me that I was doing something like that. And one day he says, "Come with me." He says, "I just bought a new backhoe for you." And he bought one. We traded mine in. They gave me like $2,000 for it. We bought this brand new backhoe. And I'm going to go to work when Harry Strano builds his motel for my father. And then my dad passed away. I quit college. I came home. I had a backhoe. And that's how I started. I did everything. I'm not ashamed to say I worked my ass off. We had a friend, Paul Greco, that owned Monmouth Oil. Yeah, Monmouth Oil Burner and Fuel Company. And I would dig oil tanks for him. I'd get paid $50. I would dig the tank, and I had to take the dirt away. Since he had a little baby dump truck, we could use his truck, but I got $50 for digging an oil tank. And that's how I got started. Then I would put septic tanks and sewer lines in, and I would do everything. So now,
And you were working by yourself? Or
working by myself.
Okay.
And then, but this company, I just got a contract to build the 3rd Avenue bathing pavilion on the beach. All I had back then was this backhoe. And I got the contract to do the excavation for the new pavilion. I didn't know anything about estimating. I had a friend, Cornelio Dellinger, his real name was Cornelio, but they called him Bill Dellinger. He was a garbage man in Ocean Township here. And he had just bought 5 brand new garbage trucks, and he owned the landfill, which is now Seaview Square, was his landfill. So somehow, after I got the backhoe, and I needed a place to park it, so he let me park it on the dump. So now I'm going to bid on the excavation for this 3rd Avenue pavilion. Well, I don't know about I knew how to run a machine. I didn't know about estimating. I didn't know anything. So Bill says, we'll get somebody to do a takeoff. So I learned how to do a takeoff, how to figure how many cubic yards, but I didn't know how much it cost a cubic yard to dig it or where you take it. I didn't know that. So now I go to sit down with Mr. Ginola to negotiate my first big contract. I'll bring Bill Dellinger in with me. He said, who's this? I said, he's Bill. Oh, you don't need him. He said, I'm not talking to him. I'm dealing with you. So Bill says, okay. He sat down. Now I come into this room. We had these blueprints out on the table, and he said, what's your price? And I told him, oh, he says, look, he says, you've got to understand something. We're doing this for the community. He says, you got to do better on your price because I want you to do the job because you're from Asbury. I said, okay. He says, here's what we'll do. He says, see these footings over here? So you don't have to dig them. He puts a circle around. He says, my man will dig them. Fine. Over here, see those? Don't dig them. Puts an X there. So I deduct all that money. Now he gives me the contract. Contract says, Henry Vaccaro does all the excavation and backfill for the new job. Great. Do the job. I'm done. He has a superintendent. He says, when are you going to dig those footings? I said, they're not in my contract. He said, read your contract. You do all excavation and backfill. I said, but Mr. Ginola said I don't have to dig them. How do you know that? Here's the drawing. See that circle? That circle doesn't mean nothing. How about over there? That X don't mean nothing. They made me do all that damn work. So now Ginola comes to the job, and I am so pissed. I throw him down in a hole, and they had to pull people off of me. I mean, I'm like 19 years old, and so he throws me off of the job. Well, the only way I got paid was very simple. He's doing a job for the city of Asbury Park. At the time, Mayor Chabelle, Tom Chabelle was the mayor. He was my father's roommate at Georgetown. Okay. On the city council is my uncle Henry Vaccaro, and the city clerk is my Aunt Mary. So I got paid. Okay. So that was kind of my foray into.
They took care of it.
And so they made sure that he didn't get paid unless he agreed to pay me.
So now you've got this unbelievable experience.
Okay.
So now you say, now I got to get into this business of construction.
Right. Okay, so now I convinced my mother to buy me a big front end loader, and we found it. It was an Alice Chalmers HD6G, serial number 1165.
Make a note of that.
And it had a 1.5 yard bucket on tracks, and now that brought me to the next level. Now I could do grading and excavation. Then I bought a dump truck, and one thing led to the other. Okay, so now I think what really forced me into general construction was another big contractor. They were at the time probably one of the most prominent contractors slash developers in the state. And they're going to build this big building along Deal Lake Drive, which was at the time was called the Carlton House. The name was later changed. I don't know what it's called today, but it sat right on Deal Lake Drive next to our apartment house at Deal Lake Drive. Okay. So after during this, just prior to this, I got married when I was 19 years old. When I was just turned 20, and we had an apartment in the Santander because my dad had passed away. My mother lived there rent-free, and that was kind of how I got started. But I also needed an office, and we used this piece of the boiler room in 500 Deal Lake Drive, which was the Deal Lake Drive apartment, Deal Lake Court apartment. So I had a little office in there, and there was a pipe that you had to duck your pipe to get under that to lean down to look at the plan table. So that was my first little office. So now I get a job. Contract says Henry Vaccaro does all excavation, backfill, and, quote, dewatering. To me, dewatering is, I go run a pump. I have a couple of pumps. If there's some water coming in, we pump it out. Okay? Second lesson. The contract had this big 12-story building, massive along the lake, and it had an underground garage that I dug out. But I was lucky. Now I need a place to dump the dirt. Now, back then I had one backhoe with a bucket on the front and one Caterpillar type front end loader with a bucket, pickup yard. I had one dump truck. And I remember vividly, we paid $5 an hour to rent a dump truck with the driver and a truck. Okay. Now we need a place to dump all this dirt. Well, I went over and saw Joe Harvey, and he had this, who owned a bar, which is now Bar and Company. Then it became Deal Lake Yacht Club. It became Bob Davis's, a whole bunch of things.
In Lock Harbor, right on
Yes.
the lake there.
Well, in the back, he had the lake surrounded this. Well, we filled the whole lake in without a permit. We just went back there and started dumping dirt. And that big parking lot, I filled it in. But meanwhile, on the job, I'm young, and I was very naive, but it was the best thing that happened was these lessons back then. So the contract says, I do all the dewatering. Fine, I got a couple of pumps. Little did I know, not only they have a couple of deep elevator pits, and the water was pouring in. Pumps wouldn't keep it out because we're lower than the level of Deal Lake.
All right.
So that was my introduction into something called a well point system. Now, a well point system is a giant pump, maybe 100 horsepower motor, and a string of pipes that go around the excavation, big 12-inch pipe, and about every 12 inches there was a flexible piece of pipe that came off, and then you had to push a large piece of pipe into the ground with a screen at the bottom, much like a well. A well had a point on the end of it, and that was called a well point system. So that surrounded the excavation, and you would actually pump the water at a level lower than it was coming in, so that would trap all the water, so the excavation was dry. Next job, I'm doing the excavation for a company called Britain Construction Company at the Howard Johnson Pavilion, which is right on the boardwalk.
In Asbury Park, yeah, everybody knew that.
Right next to
yeah.
Convention Hall.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Britain treated me pretty good. He was okay. But again, I wasn't getting paid on time, and I knew every month he's getting paid. So I became friends with his estimator, a man named Dylan Hemstreet. And we became good friends, and Mr. Hemstreet quit Britain. So Hemstreet went back to Tennessee, where he was born, and he comes back and he says, why don't you start your own construction company? He says, I'd like to be your estimator. And he liked the area so much that he came to work for Britain, and he came to work for me, and he became my first estimator.
So he was like this angel that dropped into your life with just the skills you needed.
Absolutely.
You were
Skills
like,
that I
what,
couldn't buy.
23 years old or something?
Yeah,
He was 80.
okay. So
Well,
now,
I think you probably figured out, the estimator, if you don't have an estimator, you can never make any money.
absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Good doing the work is one thing, but getting it at the right price is the next thing. Okay. So at this time, right after the Howard Johnson Pavilion, the Sunset Pavilion burnt down. that was opposite the Berkeley Carteret Hotel, and there was a bridge that connected the Berkeley Carteret Hotel across Ocean Avenue to the Sunset Pavilion. The Sunset Pavilion was designed by the same firm, I think, Williams and Wetmore, I'm not sure the name of it, but they did the Grand Central Station in New York. They designed the Berkeley, they designed the convention hall, the casino building, and at the other end of the beachfront, there was another pavilion, the Asbury Avenue Pavilion, that matched the Sunset Pavilion, except there was no bridge. And there was a fire under the boardwalk, a gas main exploded, it caught the building on fire, and you couldn't actually burn it down because it was brick and concrete, but it did so much damage that the city decided to replace it. Meanwhile, I just hired Mr. Hempstead. Well, I got the job to do the demolition. I actually tore the bridge down that connected the pavilion to the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. This bridge was an arch made out of concrete, and then it was infilled with cinders, which was a light weight rather than dirt. It was lighter than dirt, and then they poured a walkway on the top. So the first thing I did was cut a hole underneath, drain out all the cinders, truck them away. So now I'm just left with this big arch. But if you try to break it with jackhammers, you'll be there a month and a half. So I rented a crane. What was funny is every time he would drop the ball, it would sometimes drop in a different spot, and you got to really keep pounding on the same spot to crack this concrete. So I says, hey, let me go up there. So I went up, I had a hard hat on, I'm standing there, and I said, when I do this to my hard hat, you drop the ball. Okay, so I'm standing, we got it over the right spot. I do this, do this, do this. The next thing, the whole damn bridge comes down and I'm on it. I stood right on down on the bridge. Didn't get hurt, but so now the city's going to take bids to rebuild the Sunset Pavilion. Well, Mr. Hempstreet, who was the estimator for Britain, was very friendly with Mr. Gawker. And we got, some inside information on the bid and everything, and we got the set of drawings. Now I want to bid this job. Well, to bid a major construction job, you need a bid bond and a performance bond to guarantee that you're going to complete the project. Okay, we got everything together. I can't get a performance bond. I get hooked up with a guy named Gene Barnes from Reliance Insurance Company, who happened to have been the bonding company for Britain. And at the last minute he says, we can't give you a bond. I says, you gotta let me bid this job. He says, Henry, I'm sorry, you don't have the experience. Even though you have Mr. Hempstreet, we can't give you a performance bond. I said, you got to. I said, you're gonna embarrass me. This is my hometown. Everybody knows I'm bidding this job, please. He says, look, I don't want to embarrass you. He says, this is what we can do. Another one of our clients named King Construction Company is bidding the job. I'm going to get his bid, and I'm going to submit your bid for you, and I'm going to make it $5,000 higher than King, so it doesn't look bad and shows everybody that you bid the job and you just didn't happen to get it. Well, what am I going to do? So bid comes in. King Construction is the low bidder. It's over the budget by $25,000. I went and sat down with Mayor Tom Chabelle. I said, Mayor, I says, please do me a favor, see if you can rebid the job. I guarantee you that I can come in under your budget. I convinced the mayor, throw the bid out. Now they throw the bid out and they're going to rebid. Nobody knows that I'm bidding because they don't, so you got King Construction, you got the other people that are rebidding this job. So I went, my dad had died, but my father had meticulous credit, and I went with my mother over to Allenhurst National Bank, and we borrowed $50,000. Back then, you had to either submit what's called a bid bond or a certified check. The bid bond was in 10% of the amount of your bid, which in the event that you did not get a performance bond, the city would keep the bid bond, so they would have 10%. So therefore, if I didn't get a performance bond, they would have kept the $50,000. That's how, I shot crap. So I'm the low bidder by like $400 on a $500,000 job. Okay, now I got to get the performance bond. So Mr. Barnes comes to town and he says, you're quite a guy. He says, you've got one big set of cleans. He says, I'm going to see how we can help you. I talked to our underwriters, and we can give you the bond, but under these conditions. we're gonna do a silent joint venture between you and your mother and all your mother's real estate. So my mother had to sign over, you know, the Santander, all these buildings that we own,
Okay.
and a silent joint venture between me and my mother to the Henry Vaccaro Construction Company. So they gave me the bond. That's how I got started.
So now you really learn a lot about bidding, bonding, and all that
I
kind of
did.
stuff. Now, this bid is to build a building, right?
Yes,
And you never built a building,
I
right?
built the building.
Okay. Now, how did you do that?
Well, I had Mr. Hemstreet, and we decided that if we're gonna be in the construction business, we're gonna be in it the right way. We're gonna be a union contractor, we're gonna hire experienced union tradesmen, and he went out, we got a great construction superintendent who happened to have been the construction superintendent on the Carlton House for Lucarelli, and he came to work for me. So now I got him, I got Mr. Hemstreet from Britain Construction Company, and we got some great foremen, and that's how we started building a job,
And you built it.
and built it.
So now you're, okay, I've done all of this stuff.
Yeah,
I got some experience, and now I built a building. Now, how did you get to be probably one of the largest builders in Monmouth County?
okay, but, so from that job, now I'm earning some money, and then the next job I got was for St. Leo the Great Convent in Lincroft, the Catholic diocese. I was awarded that job. Then we bid on a job for Central Jersey Bank it was a new branch bank in Shrewsbury, and I believe I was a little bitter, but politics, they wouldn't give me the job. Again, I'm a young man, I'm too young and too inexperienced, even though I think I was a little bitter. And I had my Uncle Martin, who was the mayor of Allenhurst, who was our family were big depositors in the Central Jersey Bank. At that time, Allenhurst became Central Jersey Bank. And he talked to the president, he said, look, he says, your nephew's low, he says, but it's too many politics, we've got to give it to Charles Hemling's son. So they gave it to Hemling. 2 years later, they built a duplicate of that, I got that job and proved myself. So kind of that was how I got started in the smaller jobs. And but now I want to grow larger. And I was lucky enough to hire another man from Asbury Park, Louis Baiano. Lou Baiano was born in Italy, came to the United States, went back to Italy during the war, and he came back, and he had a PhD in engineering from Newark College of Engineering, so he became my estimator. Okay. Now we're bidding on a couple $1 million job, the Monmouth County Library in Shrewsbury. So I'm really getting up in stature. And we make a mistake on the bid, an error on the bid, and I'm like,
Not a decimal point, I hope.
it turned out to be.
Oh,
And we put the bid in, and I'm a little bitter, maybe, I don't recall at the time, let's just say $100,000. Okay. Something didn't seem right, so I contacted the county and I said, I want to withdraw my bid. They would not let me withdraw the bid. Okay. So then we brought in an outside estimator to go through the bid, and he goes through everything. He said, everything is right, there's something, everything checks out. Then we go to the last page, I transposed a number that should have been $80,000 and put it down as $8,000 on the summary page, so we're off that amount of money.
$70,000.
Okay. So we show that to the county, we file suit, and the case is set to be heard in freehold. The judge gave the fairest ruling I've ever seen come out of a judge, so nobody was hurt. He says, I believe that it's unfair for one person to take advantage of a unilateral mistake. This is what I'm going to order. I'm going to order that amount of money be added to the bid. I'm going to order that it's got to be rebid. I'm also going to order that Mr. Vaccaro has to bid the job with the revised bid with that new number added to it. So in other words, the county gets it rebid, I don't get hurt. Okay. So now I'm going to go rebid it. And now there's people out there that know my bid, and they're going to undercut it. So I dropped my bid by $8,000 and I get the job. And I completed the Monmouth County Library.
Now, that's the one in Shrewsbury?
Yeah.
So you built it?
I built that. I built your library over here and it's right down the street from you.
Steel Road and.
Yeah, I built that library.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, during the course of the library, I get introduced to a man named Bruno Califatti. He comes to work for me, and we little by little got our bonding capacity increased, and I then had enough money, and I bought a piece of land out of Neptune and built a brand new office at 3320 Highway 66. And you know, we hit it big time. We did so. We worked all over the place. I built over here. I built a wayside school. I built the intermediate, not the intermediate school. Yeah, the intermediate school on
West Park Avenue.
West Park Avenue.
Yeah.
I built that. I built buildings at Monmouth College. I built 32 schools, 7 high-rises, 5 hospitals. And the biggest job I did I did JFK Hospital in Edelson. I did the original Freehold Hospital in Freehold, which is now Center State. I built that. I built the big addition on South Asbury Hospital. I built Riverside Hospital in Secaucus, which later became Meadowlands Hospital. And big addition on South Amboy.
And a
The
prison,
Tower
right?
building at Jersey Shore Medical Center.
Now, let me ask you a question. Now, you started out taking down a bridge at the Berkeley Carteret, right? Now, I'm imagining you had multiple ones going on at one time.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing
How
Three or four.
many people did you have employed at this?
over. This is what was instilled in me by Bruno. He said, if you look today, you have no contractors. They're all, quote, construction managers. Everything is subbed out. They don't even own a wheelbarrow. Everything is subbed out. We did everything ourselves. We did our own excavation. We did our own concrete work. We did our own masonry work, our own drywall. And the only thing we didn't do were the mechanical trades.
So you must have had to have probably millions of dollars worth of equipment.
Yeah, well, we did. I owned everything from even scaffolding. I probably had 1,000 frames of scaffolding at one time. I had 3 big hoists I owned at one time, plus bulldozers and trucks and lowboys and trailers. And yeah, we were one of the innovators. I can remember some of the older contractors like Sutherland and Backer and S.J. Day. When they came to the job, they would build a shanty. You didn't have trailers for offices. You had shanties all prefabbed and built on the site. And then to go up to the different levels, I can remember seeing ramps. And they had these power buggies and it would go up different ramps to get up to 3 or 4 story building.
Wow.
That's how it was done back then. And I was kind of innovative and one of the early guys. And I did it. I did it my way.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
But I did some crazy stuff. I mean, I built a 9-story jail in Trenton with an underground, 3-level underground parking garage. And I mean, I've been through some major litigation. And that was one. I sued the county. We were the prime contractor, but there was a separate contractor for the steel because there was some steel false work on a 9th story of the concrete building, which enclosed an outdoor gym, but they had steel work and netting all around it so the prisoners can't get out. But the whole building was 9 stories of concrete, which we poured ourselves. It was an underground garage, 9-story jail, but it was backed up to the existing jail with a little street, maybe like 14 feet wide, called James Street. And through that street, they would bring the prisoners to the jail and everything, and we're building right there. So the problem was, all the utilities came through James Street, which meant that you had the sanitary sewer line, the storm sewer line, the water line, the gas line, the electric, all in the street. So naturally, you put in the first thing, the deepest thing first, and then you work your way up. Well, we were the prime contractor, but we were not the plumbing contractor. They had another plumbing contractor. So the plumber installs the deepest thing, which, say, the storm sewer line. Well, they had to put a test on it to make sure that, okay. So the architect did not like the test and failed them. They had their own engineer do the test and passed it. So now they get in this big battle. They throw the plumber off the job. Okay. The plumber had 2 trailer loads of special bathroom fixtures, because in a jail you have a special fixture. There's one unit, it's all stainless steel. That's a sink and a toilet all in one, and it folds up into the wall. In fact, the mirrors are stainless steel, they're not glass. So if you're looking at stainless steel, that's how shiny. Meanwhile, we can't complete building the job without a plumber. So the architect says, well, I want to know all your delays and damages because we're going to sue the plumber. Meanwhile, I'm doing the job half-assed, right? I mean, you got to leave walls out here, floors out over there because you don't have the plumbing pipe. So they throw them off the job, and they call the bonding company. Yep, we terminated your plumber. You come in and take over. The bonding company hires an expert, and they say, our guy did nothing wrong, and they refuse to replace him. So the job stopped. Meanwhile, they go to court, and a plumber is now went bankrupt. And the bonding company wins a breach of contract against the county, who wouldn't now pay them, and he went to court and had them all arrested. So now we're back on a job, and by the time they get a new plumber, 5 months goes by. So I submit a damage claim, because that meant I had to work through the winter, and I had to supply temporary heat on this big 9-story job. I mean, we had heaters that, I had like 1 million BTU big gas heaters hooked up to 1,000-gallon propane tanks. The heating alone was a couple $100,000. So we submit the claim. Now they don't want to pay me. So we demand arbitration. We had an 8-member arbitration panel, all lawyers. Try to get 8 lawyers together at one time. I mean, meetings were canceled and rescheduled. Probably took 2 years. Okay. The county had all the money in the world. They had Lentz, Goldman, and Spitzer as their lawyer. I got my little hometown lawyer, Dick McCumber. They hired the foremost authority in the world on critical path scheduling. This guy invented it, basically. He's on a cover of Engineer News Record. I mean, he's who in scheduling. So he shows up at one of these meetings. He's got all these blueprints, and just well, he couldn't work there, but he could have worked over there. And so he never met Bruno Calafati. Bruno says, Henry, something's wrong here. So we have maybe a month between the next hearing, so we ask if they can give us this layout that he had. Well, in my office, we did our own critical path scheduling. It's a computer-generated schedule, and we were one of the first contractors that did that. This is Bruno again. We went out and bought, it was called an 1130 IBM computer, and back then, the computers were punch cards.
Oh, yes.
They were terrible, so that meant you had to have a key punch operator. So we had 2 key punch operators, just putting data in, and then you run the cards through the processor, and then if it got too humid, the cards would stick together. You had to do, oh man, it was a nightmare. So we take this and we pull it all apart and find out that the guy plugged in phony dates to make it work.
Oh.
We proved this all on a computer. Now you got to picture the scenario. We've got all these lawyers on these big table, and we got the floor. They didn't have a table big enough, so we're on the floor, and he got the blueprints rolled out, and we point to where this guy, he admitted that they put a phony number in. Make a long story short, we sued them for $1.6 million. They awarded me $2.5 million.
Unbelievable.
So now, wait a minute, we win the case. Now they don't want to pay me. My little hometown lawyer, Dick McCumber, who was the most incredible lawyer and honest. He goes and levies on their bank account. They can't make payroll on Friday. Quick phone call. Have a meeting with the head of the freeholders, and here's the deal. If at the end of the 90 days we don't have the $2 million, the award will be back to the original award of $2.4 million plus interest. I'm actually took the deal, because you could be in court for years fighting. So, and we eventually got the $2 million. And
Well, here's what I'm observing here right now. When you were going to Monmouth College at night, do you think you would have ever learned any of this stuff?
no, no. I didn't have the education, but I knew to hire the people with the experience. I hired the right people. So that's a lesson for anybody. If you don't know yourself, surround yourself with the right people. And I did.
Very good.
At what point I'm thinking, now, are you a builder?
Well,
You know,
after I built the Sunset Pavilion, I was a builder.
Okay,
So back in the 80s, Asbury Park was really deteriorating. Berkeley Carteret Hotel had been closed for about 5 or 6 years. It was all boarded up. And it was sold at a tax sale for like $50,000 to a couple developers from Delaware named Profita. And they didn't do anything. Now the city's gonna hold them in default, and I met with them. I met with Mr. Profita, and I worked out a deal to buy the hotel. For Sebastian and myself.
Sebastian and...
Worked out a deal to buy this hotel. And my brother didn't want me to do it, but we got to save this building. The city had an estimate to tear the building down. They claimed that it was not functional any longer, and they're going to demolish the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. I said, oh my God, can't let this happen.
Especially if you had seen it when in the heyday.
Yeah, that's the same building, the same room that my father had his dinner.
Yeah.
So you already had an emotional attachment to the
Yeah,
building.
it goes back to 1925. My grandfather was a contractor for all the landscaping, and they couldn't pay my grandfather, and he got stock in lieu of debt. I still have the stock certificates. So that's it. Then my mother and father got married there in 1939. My father's testimonial there in 1959, and then in 1960 I got married there. Same crystal ball, and now I look at it like that. So we worked out a deal. We paid him $325,000. Now we're a successful contractor, but we were not developers. I mean, we worked for people that had the money, that either counties or municipalities, and we had the wherewithal to build the buildings, but we didn't have the wherewithal to finance them and things like that. So our first thought was, and we went to our bank, Central Jersey Bank, and they were going to loan us some money to convert it into an apartment house, which was the easy way out. And we just couldn't do that. So Mayor Ray Kramer, who was the mayor of Asbury, that he worked out a deal. They're going to sell the entire beachfront, the convention hall, the Paramount Theater, the casino, the power plant, all the pavilions, all the way down to and including the Marine Grill lot, which sat at the north end of town where there's a restaurant called the Marine Grill. Everything is going to be sold for $2 million. So I called up Frank Fiorentina, who was a councilman, who said, Frank, what's going on? He was a councilman. Well, the mayor wants to sell this. Frank said, ain't right. So I went to court, I got a temporary restraining order, and I stopped the sale. I did.
On what grounds? On what grounds?
On that there was not enough time. You couldn't even get an estimate. They gave you 2 weeks to bid it. You couldn't even get an estimate from an insurance company as to the cost to insure the buildings in 2 weeks. That's how massive this was. And let alone, there was no plan of what they're going to do with the buildings. So the judge issued a TRO, and he said, I'm not going to block the sale, but if they award it to a guy named Robert Oberst, they're going to come before me. So the city agreed not to award the contract. I then convinced the city that if you're going to go forward with this, you need to have a plan, and you've got to make sure that whoever gets it can get a bond that's going to guarantee that you're going to complete what they're going to build. So the mayor came up with a plan. They were going to put some guidelines on the bidding process. Pre-qualifications. Comes the day of the bid, I'm the only one that's qualified. Oberst submits a bid, he doesn't meet the qualifications, and the city accepts my bid. Oberst, oh, this is interesting. When he first submitted his bid of $2 million, the Asbury Park Press interviewed him and says, how are you going to be able to fund this? Oh, he said, we don't have the money right now, but I'm sure we can raise it in a limited partnership.
Said that in the press.
In the press, and I still have that article. So based on that, the judge threw everything out. So now Oberst sued, and so did a man named Ted Murnick, and they both sued on the grounds that pre-qualifications are not allowed in a public bidding statute under which the property was sold, and they were right. So the judge throws my bid out. I'm pissed. Murnick comes up to me. It's the first time I really met him. He says, look, he says, I'm not against you. He said, I think you got a wonderful idea to do this. He says, but and I will support you if the mayor will set up some type of redevelopment authority to develop all the land around there, not just the beachfront. Okay, so he supports me. One of my attorneys at the time was Alan Davis of the Walens, Goldman and Spitzer firm. So I talked to him, talked to the mayor. We arranged a meeting with the mayor and the city manager, and I bring in Stanley Benn, who was from Ocean Township, God rest his soul. He was another attorney with the firm who was in their land use department. And they convinced the Mayor Kramer to set up a redevelopment authority. And they hired Wilentz, Coleman, and Spitzer. Okay, when they went to work, they went through all the statutes and they found out that there's already that a city the size of Asbury Park can only have one redevelopment authority, and that was already vested with the housing authority. So they had to make a resolution for the housing authority to give up their rights anything east of Grand Avenue. Okay, so now they can't set up another authority, but they set up a waterfront redevelopment advisory board. Mayor Kramer agreed. They put on the board prestigious businessmen with strong business ties. The first chairman was Jim Rifficy, Vice President Amarada Hess. You had Jules Plangiers, editor of the press. James Dolan, president of the gas company. Frank Anfuso, Vice President of Mid-Atlantic Bank. Peter Beal, Vice President of National Community Bank. And then we had a local undertaker, James Hunt from Asbury Park. They were all appointed to the Waterfront Advisory Board, and the mayor agreed not to have any political interference. And they were then engaged. They formally hired Wilentz, Coleman, and Spitzer, and then they went out and they formally hired a planning firm, Norman Day Associates from Philadelphia. They really wanted the Rouse Company, but the Rouse Company, who developed South Street Seaport in New York, was so busy they couldn't get to the project for a year, so they hired Day. It took a year for them to come up with a new master plan, and in order to incorporate the plan, they had public meetings. Sometimes the meetings would last 4 to 5 hours, packed house. I attended all of them. And what they did was try to include all the comments from the public and include the public. So the plan was developed into a bunch of subsections, and one happened to be C-8, which is where the uncompleted high-rise was eventually built. That's why it was called C8, because on the C8 block. So each block had a designation. You had a C1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 8.
That's the building that stood so long,
Yes.
well, half done?
That was called C8, okay.
Okay.
But the plan was to help the citizens and business people and landowners of Asbury Park. So if you own a piece of property in a subsection, you could develop your own property as long as you develop it in accordance with the new plan. And you had to hire local people first, and you had to hire local businesses. That's how it was initially designed. Okay, so they put it out to bid. As I mentioned before, I was capable of building anything in a zone, but I didn't have the money to develop it. Building and developing are two different things. But my brother and I bought 21 parcels of property over the years. We owned 21 pieces of property in a waterfront redevelopment. So we bought the Monterey Hotel lot. We had 2 other parking lots, the one behind the Empress Motel, the one across the street. We bought 3 motels. We bought 2 bars and bought the old Rollo bus terminal. And so we positioned ourselves so that whoever became the master developer or the sub-developer would at least have to talk to us, and we get a shot to do the construction, which was our business. So they put it out to bid, and I'm scurrying to try to find a partner. Couldn't find anybody, so I get a phone call from from George Michaels, who owned Michaels Restaurant in Asbury, and he says, I'd like you to invite you to lunch at Deal Golf Club. He says, I want you to meet Ernie Onassis. Okay, so at the meeting I meet Ernie Onassis, and I meet another man, senior moment, Dick Levy, who was a vice president of Cushman and Wakefield, large real estate firm in New York, and they want to get involved. Ernie then becomes my first partner in the hotel along with Johnny Cash. And now they're trying to help me look for a partner to develop everything. I had a meeting with Donald Trump because Dick Levy was the best man at Robert Trump's wedding. So he knew Robert, his brother, and he knew Donald, and we went at the Donald. And he was so busy with Atlantic City, Asbury Park wasn't in his bag, and he turned us down, but he was gracious. They then went out and they hooked me up with a guy named Joe Carabetta from Connecticut.
This name is now familiar because anyone who's followed Asbury Park all these years remembers the name Carabetta. Yeah.
Okay, at the time, Carabetta owned over 12,000 apartment units, owned them and managed them. He had over $18 million in cash in the bank, was the perfect partner. Now, I didn't know this when we first met, and at the time, we were dealing with the First National Bank of Toms River, who gave us a mortgage on the Berkeley and a mortgage on some other property. We got a call from, I forget the guy's name, not Bill Robertson, I forget the other guy's name. He calls us up, he says, we just checked out Carabetta's financial statement. I'm saying to him, I said, oh my God, don't tell me he's got a phony statement. He said, you're not going to believe this. I said, what? He says, his net worth is so understated, it's unbelievable. He says he has a building listed on a cost basis of $5 million, which he's now selling for $9 million. All of his property was on a cost basis, so understated. Well, I felt relieved. We put together a deal, and Carabetta became the managing member of the joint venture, which was called Vaccaro Developers. We submitted a bid, and we were the successful bidder for the entire beachfront. While this is going on, my brother and I are raising the money to do the Berkeley Carteret Hotel. We had all kind of problems raising the money. Nobody wants to invest in a hotel in Asbury Park, New Jersey.
What year is this?
This is 83.
83, okay.
Nobody, believe me, we went all over. I mean, I was doing business with at the time. Central Jersey Bank was our main bank. I'm doing business with Mid-Atlantic Bank. Wouldn't touch it. And I'm talking to Harry Vaccaro one day, and he says, I'll make a call for you. Makes a call, and he puts me on the phone with a man named Bill Robertson, who was the president of the First National Bank of Toms River.
Hovnanian's the big builder in the area, homes.
Yeah, big,
yeah.
I mean,
Still.
Big, yeah,
really
still,
big.
yeah.
And very big in Ocean County. And we became friends, and introduced me to Toms River Bank, and they seemed interested, and one thing led to another. They invested heavily in Seaside and Toms River when no other banks were around. They felt Asbury Park is the next boom area. In fact, Hovnanian built a big building on 66, and the bank had an office there. Which is
That's
something
right,
close.
yeah.
So Toms River agrees to give us the mortgage, first mortgage. But the more we got into it, they agreed to give us a $6 million mortgage. We eventually needed $7.5 million. So we went back to them, and believe it or not, Ernie Onassis came to a meeting with me with the board of directors of the Toms River Bank. That's what an incredible man he was. We actually went to the board meeting, and when they saw Ernie come in, they said, if this guy believes in it, we're going to try and help you.
Well, he was a big news guy in New York.
Yeah, he was at that time, he was a news anchor on a Channel 7 News in New York, on both the 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock news.
Some people knew him, and
But what's interesting is, his wife is from Asbury Park. His wife, Kelly, was the daughter of the Greek priest at St. George Greek Orthodox Church, and went to high school with my brother. So that was a connection. He loved Asbury Park. So when he comes into the board meeting, I remember Bill Robertson says, he says, our problem is our legal lending limit is $6 million. So Ernie says, well, I know a couple of banks in New York, maybe I can reach out to them. And just like that, Bill Robertson, wait a minute, picks up the phone in front of us, calls the vice president of Marine Midland Bank in Buffalo, New York, and on the phone they gave us the other $1.5 million. That's how we eventually put that together. Now as the project grew in scope, because we did a complete gut, we ripped out every room in a place, except we rebuilt all the ballrooms as they were in 1926. So we gave that old hotel a new heart and completely new mechanical system, you name it, brand spanking new. And then we restored the entrance to where it was when it was built, which was in the front, because over the years they had built a wall around there and put a swimming pool in where the entrance was, and you entered from the side off of Ocean Avenue. So there was no grand entrance at all. And I was talking to the mayor one time because we still needed additional money. And Ray Kramer could not have been a bigger help than what he was. He reached out to Congressman Howard and Senators Lautenberg and Bill Bradley, and they supported what's called a UDAG grant. They don't have this program any longer. UDAG, Urban Enterprise Initiative Grant, as it was called. And it was for urban cities. And if the project qualified, the federal government would loan or would grant the city X number of dollars, and the city in turn would then lend it to the developer at little or no interest. And when it was repaid, the city now had the money to put into other projects. That's how the Asbury Park Press was built in Neptune. They got a grant from the government to pay all the infrastructure work.
Exactly, yeah.
So we eventually applied for it, and now it's getting political about the grant because now you have a Republican president in, and you have Democratic congressmen and senators supporting it. I went to Larry Bathgate, an attorney, big-time attorney. He had been the head of the National Republican Fund. He was the chairman of the National Republican Party Fundraising Committee. He was the chairman in office in Washington as well as in Lakewood. He hooks us up with a meeting with Samuel Pierce, the head of HUD.
Housing and Urban Development.
Yes,
Yeah.
in Washington. So Larry says, be in my office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. He says, we're going to Washington. I arrive at his office. There's a helicopter waiting. We get in the helicopter to Washington. Limo picks us up. We meet the director of HUD. We got the loan that day.
For the Berkeley Carteret.
A $3.2 million grant that
That's
day.
okay.
So that's great to know. Because all that information is, you're putting it out there now. Nobody knows that.
Okay, so that's how we got the grant. That was the missing piece to give us the money. And then I put together a limited partnership, which included Johnny Cash, June Carter Cash, Ernie Nassis, 3 members of the Hovnanian family, and some other local people, Ted Murrick and Frank Mandy and other local people. They all invested in the hotel. And it was a great deal for an investor because there was a program, if you rebuilt a building 60 years old or older, you got an investment tax credit of 25%. So we worked out a deal with Tom's River Bank that if you're a qualified investor, they would loan you $25,000 a year for 5 years to make the investment, but the first day, you're getting more than that back in a tax credit because it was against the total cost of the hotel. So if it's a $20 million cost, at a 20% tax credit, that's $4 million in tax credit that go to the investors. So it was great for them, but I'm the managing member, I got nothing. So that's how we eventually got that. Now, we win an award from HUD in Washington, D.C. as the best project in the entire United States for using public and private money. We gave more bang for the buck than any other project. We employed more people. We got more done than any other project. And we're invited to Washington to this big dinner. And
Now, was this for the hotel?
yes,
or
just for the hotel.
Okay.
The Berkeley Carteret Associates. And who presents the award? A freshman senator by the name of Mitch McConnell. Not a
Oh, no
picture
kidding.
of him presenting us the award.
How about that,
And
huh?
that's his first year as a senator. In other words, they passed these menial his task off to all the freshman senators, so he gave us the award.
And now public-private kind of deals
Yes, sir.
are becoming, and
Okay,
have
that's
been
what
for
I'm
years.
trying to do now with the Historic Convention Center. I'm trying to work a deal out to take that over from the developer, Madison Marquette, and put it into a nonprofit. And we can raise the funds to rehabilitate the convention center. And who cares who runs it? They can run it. I just want to save the building. And the only way you can save it is through some of these grants that only a nonprofit can get today. Private companies can't get this money.
I mean, you have all those personal connections, but the area, that building holds a lot of memories and a lot of connections.
And now that's what saved the development. Can you imagine if that hotel was torn down, would somebody then come?
Yeah.